Hi there, it's Lee here. Welcome to iMineBlocks. In today's video we're going to be doing some upgrades and repairs on this machine here. So this machine is actually Worker1, which you would have seen or heard about in my previous videos. I did actually have it originally in a all aluminium Cooler Master case, but in the last week because I thought the actual machine was overheating, or it was actually running very hot, it kept on shutting down on a fairly frequently basis. Sort of every 2 to 3 days it would shut down, and I thought that was because it was overheating. So what I did was transferred all the actual internals of the machine into this new sort of cheap case here, so from the Cooler Master case into this cheaper one. And then it was going okay for another couple of days, but then it kind of got progressively more and more problematic. It would shut down randomly, and also actually restarting the machine was becoming a bit of a problem as well. It kept on getting stuck on the actual BIOS, kept on glitching a bit. So then I thought it might be due to the actual Xeon processor mod that I actually done on this machine. I replaced the CPU, which is a Core 2 Duo E6600, and I swapped that out for a Xeon 5450, I think it was. So I swapped that, so I thought that might have been exacerbating the issue. So what I did was remove that after it had been already fitted into this new sort of case. I went back to the Core 2 Duo, and the problem persisted, and it seemed to get worse and worse from then onwards. So now at a point which is, in this part of the video, I'll show you exactly what the issue is now, or the symptoms that I'm actually getting. So I'll show you that now. Just show you the problem that I'm actually having with this machine. So we just go and power it on. So it shut down then. Didn't even get a display that time, or maybe just about. So this machine, sometimes it will boot into the BIOS, but then when you go for the reset or restart from the actual save settings, then you're just getting these continuing problems. So just try again. Nothing. So it looks like an actual something shorting it out, almost as if it's like a power issue, but it's not. It's due to a motherboard fault, and it is definitely something to do with the actual BIOS, because sometimes the BIOS is picking everything up, sometimes it's not picking up the hard drives, and all sorts of different issues. So you can see what the actual problem that I've had there. So the issue is that the machine is not starting up. It's almost like it's shorting out, but I've gone through the whole sort of troubleshooting step by step, and worked kind of in a logical kind of manner to actually sort of identify the actual issue. So the problem is the machine will not start up. It goes into BIOS, but the BIOS is really glitchy. It's always been a little bit glitchy, but now sometimes it's getting into BIOS, and when it does, if you set a date or time, the BIOS will freeze. Sometimes it's not picking up the hard drives, and all sorts of other weird glitches, and that's assuming you can get into the BIOS. And then the worst thing about it is that once you actually save the BIOS and go to do the actual machine restart, it doesn't actually restart, it gets stuck again. So I've gone through it, I've removed all the components bit by bit, and basically stripped the whole machine back to bare basics. So just with the actual power supply, the motherboard, the RAM and the CPU of course, and it's still getting the same issue. So unless it's some weird problem with the actual power supply, I'm like 99.9% it is the actual motherboard. There was one other thing that I possibly could have tried to resolve this issue, and that was to reflash the BIOS, because the one that I flashed last time had some extra CPU code, microcode in it, for the purposes of that Xeon processor, so that possibly could have been causing a issue as well. But anyway, this machine is really old. I mean, the case is sort of new, it's only a cheap case, but the internals are really, really old, and they was due for an update. So what I've decided to do is purchase some new hardware, and that's going to be on the second part of this video. So what I'm going to be doing is dismantling this machine Worker1, and giving it a whole new rebuild and upgrade, some new hardware, and hopefully that will solve our issue, and also we'll get some performance increase as well. Like I say, I'm upgrading it because I think it's the best part of 10 years old. The internals in this machine, you don't really hear of many people using a Core 2 Duo or anything like that nowadays. I think I purchased it around 2007, something like that, so well overdue for an update. So that's what I'm doing in the second part of this video, and yeah, I'll be sharing that experience with you guys. Okay, let's start by taking out the old components and getting everything ready for the new installation. So it's a little bit disappointing with the old one because I took a little bit of extra time to make everything fairly neat and tidy, and it's a bit of a bummer to realise that the machine is basically knackered. So anyway, we're going to start by removing the actual graphics cards, power connectors, everything, the whole motherboard, CPU, RAMs, that's all going to come out. The hard drives I'll leave in there, they're actually up the top, out of the way. I've got a 120mm fan in this part here, obviously power supply's down the bottom, but basically the main board and everything attached to it has got to come out, and that's what we shall be replacing today. Get the first of our graphics cards out. It does have the little sort of security hook at the back, which you can't actually get to once the actual card is in place, so you kind of have to just work it out a little bit. So that's the first graphics card out, our RX 470. Second GPU. Just disconnecting the power connector here, and then this fan connector. I think that one of those connectors is actually stuck. Yeah, one of the actual Modex connectors is actually stuck inside the other connector. See that? Okay, then I'm just taking this card out here, which is a USB 3 to PCI Express card. Because this motherboard is so old, it doesn't actually have USB 3. I'm not even entirely sure it even supports USB 2. So that's that out. So now I'll just continue on, just unplugging the connectors, and we'll be ready to take the board out. There's one tight connector. There's also a CPU connector at the back that might be easier to undo afterwards. Okay, so that's all the actual connectors. So now I just need to unscrew the actual board itself. Okay, so that's all the actual motherboard screws out, so we're ready to take out the actual motherboard itself. Just double check and make sure I've got everything disconnected, which I have except for the one GPU, the actual CPU power connector at the back. I might disconnect these hard drive connectors as well, just to help the board come out a little bit more freely. I don't think we're going to quite get the clearance we need, so I'm going to leave the hard drives in, but then take out this 120mm fan and tip it that way. That should work. Let's get to that CPU connector now. Just kind of shortly work it out. And it is out. So the size of that heatsink on there, absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, so here's something that you probably won't have ever seen, especially if you're a little bit younger than me, is this is a 40 pin, I think it's 40 pin, 38 pin floppy drive connector, and that is a IDE connector for connecting your hard drives and old CD-ROM drives. Now it's obviously all serial ATA or even M.2. But yeah, this is quite an old board. It served me well, but it's time to move on. Okay, so this is our cavity space. Obviously we're going to be fitting the new components in there. I'm just going to leave it as it is for the time being. Once I get the new motherboard, I'll be able to sort of install it, and I'll kind of see how everything goes together at that point. But I did have the cables fairly tidy, so I'm probably just going to leave that the same for the time being. Okay, so the motherboard is out. What I'm going to actually do now is remove this Noctua fan. So I've actually purchased a replacement heatsink and fan for the new motherboard and CPU, but I think this one possibly might actually be able to go onto the new motherboard, and it's a really good heatsink and fan system, so if I can reuse it then I will, and I'll send the one back that I've purchased, and that can go back and I'll just get a refund on that. But on this one I think you can get different mountings on the bottom, and I only have the single one, so I'm not too sure whether that's actually going to fit onto new motherboard. Probably won't, but I shall try. So I'll get this removed and ready to go onto the new one if it can be adapted. So let's start by getting out all the RAM. just move this out of the way so then we can work a little bit more freely. So these Noctua fans have this little clip system, like a little spring-loaded bar, and it just kind of hooks around to the actual side of the actual heatsink and then latches over and kind of clips onto the front of the fan there. Quite easy when you've got it all out and exposed, but if you're kind of in a confined space within the case, it can be a little bit tricky. So just kind of unravel the fan. It's actually, the cable is tucked a little bit behind the back. Okay, I'll just leave that actually. So then we've got two screws. One is a front spring-loaded screw, and then we've got another one on the back as well. So they're spring-loaded so that you put enough tension on but don't go crazy on it. That's our heatsink released. Just undo the fan connector. A little bit of a wiggle. Okay, so we've got this bottom part here, which is kind of like a spar bracket system, and I think on the actual motherboard, the replacement motherboard, I don't think this is going to be the same dimensions, possibly. So that I think that could be where the issue is on the replacement version. So anyway, we'll take this bottom section off, this bracket off, and we'll just see whether it fits on the new one or not. So that's the brackets off the top, and there's also one kind of plate on the bottom that everything screws into. So that's that done. So when the new motherboard arrives, we'll be able to sort of measure this up, do like a test fit and see whether it's going to go or not going to go.